This is the Weigh In podcast by Benoit Chestnut, and we bring to you today a special edition episode as NCAA wrestling tournament is getting started. So as we run down how the NCAA Natty tournament is going to get off to start, that is where we are. So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the NCAA Nationals, and we're also going to be talking about how on the NCAA Nationals, how the best kept thing here is going to be the bracketry work of what happened as we elected not to do our draft on podcast like last time. It just took a long time. It ended up being just a really super long episode for no rhyme or reason. So this time we elected to not have it. But if you did not see the Instagram, I will give you the rundown. So Sebastian at 125 pounds took Matt Ramos. At 133 pounds, he took Drake Ayala. At 141 pounds, he took Jesse Mendez. At 149 pounds, he took Caleb Henson. At 157 pounds, he took Meyer Sharpero. At 165 pounds, he took Mitchell Messenbrink. At 174 pounds, he took Keegan O'Toole. At 184 pounds, he took Parker Techdisen. At 197 pounds, he took AJ Ferrari. And at 285, he took Gable Stevenson. That's going to come interesting at 285. So when we break this down, over on my side of the pond here, at 125 pounds, I took Eddie Ventresca. At 133 pounds, I took Lucas Bird. At 141 pounds, I took Brock Hardy. At 149 pounds, I took Rich Lovett. At 157 pounds, I took Anterell Taylor. At 165 pounds, I took Peyton Hall. At 174 pounds, Dean Hamady. At 184 pounds, Dustin Plott. At 197 pounds, Jacob Cardenas. And 285, Wyatt Henderson. So when we talk about this, so even where do I see, as this video will have gone up after Nationals started, where do I see, some of the weakest links in some of these these bracketries? I see Matt Ramos could possibly, more than likely, is going to become an All-American for Sebastian. Drake Ayala, more than likely, I say Drake Ayala has the means to become an All-American. Jesse Mendez, I think it'll be okay. Caleb Hansen, I think he'll be okay. I think his for sure. So when we talk about the for sure possibles to All-American, you have AJ Ferrari, that's a for sure. Parker Techdisen, that's a for sure. You have Keegan O'Toole, and then you have Gable Stevenson, which is a for sure. When you look at that top half of the bracket, it's not, you can't say it's for sure. Anybody can go down. It's more, it's what we like to call the wrestling madness. Anybody can go down. When you look at my side, it's a little worse. My for sures, I would like to say, or Wyatt Henderson, I would like to say Rich Lovett, Brock Hardy, and Dustin Plott are my for sures. Jacob Cardenas, you never know. Lucas Bird, you never know. Eddie Ventresca, I think for me is not a for sure, but you never know. And I think that when you look at this, you count what you're going to get, and I think this is going to be really good. When the duels come out and the stuff gets going, I think this is going to be amazing to see because, if you all did not see the women's denomination or the women's wrestling bracketry, I stole the show. And I say that because it was not close, it was different. And I think this time around drafting, Sebastian took the choices to say, hey, I've got to draft a bigger, better squad this time. I don't want to not be close. And I think he did a very well job of doing so because you look at it. And one thing I could say, when you talk about the denomination, not having Carter Starachi is an interesting choice. And I say that because Carter's going for his 5th title. As you all know, previous episode, I challenged myself to make sure I had no Penn State guys. Keep this interesting. I could have very well. I got more than likely a couple Nittany Lions that are, I know for sure all Americans. But I elected not to do that to make this more interesting, so that as a fan of the weigh-in as you're watching, we're going to make this interesting. And I say that because now it gets a more interesting denomination. I say that because now it's not just what it was. It's not just the denomination that it might have been. It's not just what it was supposed to be. It's not just that. It's not just what it was. It's a little different in the denomination. Very different. When you look at this and when you look at what happens, it's 100% different. And one of the things you have to say that's different about it is the denomination. So one of the things we talk about when we talk about the denomination is um, the biggest thing here is he drafted a very well team. So when you're going to look and see how this play goes on across the thing, what's going to make the difference is the national finals. Now, the reason why I chose some of these guys is because you could wrestle back. If some of these guys lose early, you could wrestle back for a while. And if they all American, what I looked at is I got a group where I said I know those every last one of them are all Americans. You know, I know that there are no upsets going to be happening to my guys. But upsets can happen to anybody. And I tried to, go with guys that are gonna all American, but not guys that are gonna make me run away with the bracketry. I wanted to leave it fun for the fans and of the weigh-in and the people that watch. We did a very well time drafting through this, and now I didn't run away with this. This is very wide open. More than likely, you look at these teams and you say, well, it looks like he may very well run away with this. Well, you could say that, but there are some choices that can get beat. There are some choices that can get beat and stuff like that. There are some choices that can happen and go certain ways. And that's why I say this isn't the runaway. This is the special edition, and this is what the breaking down, as we talk about this NCAA national, and this is just going to be, out in Philadelphia, it's going to be an absolute vibe down there because this is, you don't know who's going to win what. You got ones, twos, but it is not you look at it, it's not a Penn State runaway show at every weight. They don't normally get it like they got it where they have mostly number one seeding guys. Now it's kind of a little bit of they're kind of mixed in the bunch this year, and it's going to be some tight, gutty wrestling this time where they're going to be meeting a lot of these wrestlers early, and that's something that's going to be a difference maker. And I say that because the difference is going to be made on that map come time for wrestling, which that's something that's going to be very different, and that's something that we look at and we say, okay, this is going to get interesting. And I say this because what's going to happen here is the denomination of what's going to be to come, the sacrifice. It's going to be very different. And I say it's going to be very different because what we're going to be dealing with here in this level of wrestling, in this level of expertise, this level of change going through at this is you have an area where you say, okay, there are a lot of good programs out there. A lot of good programs. Some of the programs you look at, and anybody that can contend for the team titles, you got to have at least a wrestler every weight. Every weight. You got to. Because Penn State has got a full stack lineup up here. You got Carter Starachi looking for a fifth. You got so many things that are coming out here. But at any point, everybody can be beat. I think, we'd like to bring up last year's national and the weighing in of Carter Starachi, working the rule and stepping on the mat, getting his hand raised, and medical forfeiting the rest of the tourney. But I mean, not the NCAA, the Big Ten tournament, and getting his bid to nationals. I want to know how you guys felt about that one. We're gonna kind of bring it back right now because I kind of felt, you work the rule, but no, if they're not allowing medical forfeits to make it to nationals, I know this is old news. You really should have, in theory, they should have, in theory, if it was me running the show, in theory, he wouldn't have got a bid. He wouldn't have got one. I would have said, no, you medical forfeited out. You got to wrestle. And that was the whole reason why they started that whole thing. They wanted wrestlers to wrestle and say, no, if you don't wrestle the tournament, you just walk in and medical forfeit out and get I kind of feel like I kind of feel like something where I feel like you got to uphold your rules here. Like I kind of feel like, okay, now you're saying you're hurt, you're not ready to wrestle, but you'll be ready by nationals. Well, unfortunately, you missed a chance. You're hurt. You know, I understand you want to be able to compete. Now, I'm not saying this because I don't like Carter Starachi or anything like that. I always think he's a great wrestler, great movement. You know, nice guy from what it seems. You know, but I'm coming out here as if you guys hurt, and yet again, the Kale Sanderson working the rules. You know, and obviously he's not hurt this year, but you look at had they gone about, you know, had you not given him, he would only be getting a his fourth title this year. He would not be getting a fifth. He would not be in line for fifth because last year he walked on the mat, they blew the whistle. He said, "Okay, I can no longer continue." I feel like you didn't even get a match out of that, and I think you know, I think they need to fine tweak what they said. You know, when they say you got to at least wrestle a match, they should say you have to at least compete past, halfway through the second period at least. So you make them have to actually wrestle. Because they wanted to eliminate all this medical forfeiting and all of that. But I really think if you have to medical forfeit and you're hurt, you have to. But if you're coming into a tournament where you know you can't compete and you're just looking to savor a bid to nationals, I kind of think there's somebody else out there that worked themselves off, did not make it, fell probably one placement shy, and doesn't get it because they wasted the bid on Starachi. That's the guy that I say, come on, But that was last year. That's just something that as we take it back today, we'll bring that up. They're working the rules of the metal of the injury default rule, and they're working around it. I think that in one way more than most. I'm not 100% on saying wow, they should have done that. I'm 50-50. 50% it means like, hey, that was a smart choice. Say, hey, get on there, let them blow the whistle. I wrestled, but the fan and wanting to see the wrestling match continue says, no, can't let stuff like that happen. You're hurt. You're hurt. If you can't compete, you gotta, you know, there are guys that, when you watch older NCAA wrestling, there are guys that were hurt. There are guys that have toughed out. Like one guy, Spencer Lee. Spencer Lee, as much as what happened to him not getting the fourth title, toughed out every last one of his injuries. Competed Big Tens, always competed through to the point where he's qualified, so the match doesn't matter. You don't see what Starachi did getting up there and saying, "Oh no, I'm done," because they changed the rules. When you look at the rules that were changed, the rules were changed to the point where if you were to injury default out, and I'm gonna look this up to get you the true rule here, so I don't give you something that you're not looking for. I'm gonna try to get you the real stuck it in news here on this, but I bring this up because I say, hey, so I bring this up because of what happens and why. And I say this because it's one of those things where it's like, all right, you made some changes, and I say why they did it. They did it because and when you talk about it, the working of the rule is it was put down that if you didn't wrestle the conference, you could not get a bid to nationals. So the whole point was if Starachi sat out of Big Tens, he was not going to be eligible for the conference. he was not going to be eligible to wrestle for 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 the Big Ten. I mean, for the Nationals, and that's why they went on there and said, "Well, you're not ready to wrestle, but next week you will be. So let's put you out there." But I kind of feel like, come on, if you weren't ready to wrestle, and then you're wasting that bid where there's probably somebody who worked their behind off in that tournament wrestling should have had that bid, and that was my one thing. The last year, I know, this is the first that as this Nationals time that it comes out. That this is the first time that I'm coming out and saying that how I felt about that. And that's just one thing that I wanted to bring up, that, I feel like, yeah, I understand you're hurt and that you feel that you feel that you that that you feel, oh, you want to make it and you're going to be ready next week, but this week you're okay, and you want to just go in and say I wrestled, but there's a guy that probably got beat, wrestled his way back through that through the Conti, and was just shy of getting his shot because Carter decided to say, hey, and they waste a bit on it. I kind of think you don't even, if you're hurt, you're hurt. And you say, well, no, he was able to get through the National. He was okay. No, no, you barely wrestled. I feel like when they say wrestle the conference tournament, I feel like they need to refine the rule almost and say you have to complete a match at the conference tournament. But that doesn't change nothing. He would have done the same thing. But I think you would have to say, I think you can kind of fine tune it. I think you can kind of say completed matches. So you could say, okay, you would have to have competed in most of the day. You could kind of say something like that. So wrestling starts 8:00. You take to when wrestling ends. What was the median in there, and say you would have. There's an allowed time frame where you would have had to have competed up to, and you could do something similar to something like that. And then you say, okay, you can't walk in and say, okay, I'm done for the day. And then they say, well, no, no, no. You have to compete to, let's say, for instance, wrestling at 8:00, got to compete to 12. You say, hey, no, you have to compete to 12:00 or you're out. And let them kind of look and say, well, what do you mean? No, you got to, because, these guys are just saying, oh, I wrestled the conference tournament. I just kind of think, I understand it was a smart move to work the rule like that last year. But for me, I don't think that that's even, something really good. I don't think that that's something that's even, there's always somebody that's more deserving. There was Spencer Lee, who always was wrestling left and right, and he was hurt. No doubt about that. Spencer was hurt. Went through NCAA titles, got hurt. Wrestled the rest of the year, got hurt. You look at that and you say, okay, there has been so much done. And we turn around and you look at, and you look at what goes on. You never saw him turn around and say, oh, I'm not going to wrestle Big Tens. As much as Sebastian Rivera beat him, as much as, he got beat by so many people at Big Tens, you talk about that. This is another one. I'm pretty sure, not sure if we brought this up before. Who would win in a dual meet? Spencer Lee, Logan Stieber. And I bring this up because, the other day I was talking to one of my buddies, and, he went across saying, oh, I think, you Spencer Lee and then the Logan Stieber, I think Spencer Lee was a phenomenal wrestler and had a better time. But you can compare the two. Logan Stieber was a 4-time national champion. Whether you feel the Jordan Oliver was a takedown or not, you can comfortably say, with eliminating that, 3-time. With the controversy, 4-time national champ. But he also was a 4-time Big Ten champ. And when you think about that, you say, okay, Spencer Lee never won the Big Ten championships 4 times. I understand you say, okay, well, that's not really much, but Look at who Logan Stieber had to get through in his years, and look at the conference, and tell me that that was not some tough years of Big Ten wrestling. Because you had a really good group. Yeah, they both got NCAA team titles. So, that you can't kind of say nothing about that. But the difference is Stieber's team title didn't come in a COVID year, didn't come in a year where, it wasn't a full season worth of wrestling, he had some phenomenal years up at Ohio State. I mean, if you're looking at some good old wrestling matches to watch some good wrestling, you watch Zane Rutherford, Logan Stieber at the dual meet, the Penn State dual meet, and you see that match, and there is when we talk about wrestling as your best self, let me tell you, that was some best Zane Rutherford wrestling that night. And you talk about that, and you say that in just in that, and when you go back, you say who was the greatest. Obviously, between you go out. We all know the greatest NCAA wrestler. More than likely, you talk about guys like Dan Gable. You talk about Cael Sanderson. You talk about With that being aside, you talk about Kyle Dake. With that being aside, and the guys we talk about, and you look at wrestling wise, bear down to the bone of the two wrestlers that were just at similar weight. Who wins? Spencer Lee, Logan Stieber. Both in their prime. Who wins? That would have been a good match. Because you say to yourself, who wins? Who wins? Who wins? That is a very interesting thing to say. Because it's so much that you could go across in stuff like that, but it's so much you could say when you bear it down to that. But it just comes down to that. I think would be both in their prime would be a really nice matchup, something to think about. But there is just so much more that you get at and you get after and you talk about and you say, wow, is that what we think it is? Yeah, it is. It's kind of like that. It's one of those, like, where do you feel you get at with certain stuff? And I think that it's just a lot of good stuff, and I think that when you talk about that, it just gets true to the point. With it being Nationals time, I think I challenge you guys to say what is going to be what do you guys think at this point will be the biggest upset of the national tournament? And that's a question that can be answered even before it starts, not just in the first round of the whole tourney. And I think this is going to be what'll be what'll be very interesting is Parker Tech Tyson winning a national title. Now that'll be just right. When we talk about Parker Tech Tyson, I think more than deserving Parker Tech Tyson to win a national title, because the path to that national title is going to be interesting. That is something that we can like denominize and say, hey, that's going to be interesting. Parker Tech Tyson at that 184, that is going to be interesting. And I say that because it is going to be more than lavish, because it's going to look good. It's going to look amazing to have Parker Tech Tyson take a national title. Now, I didn't draft Parker Tech Tyson, so that's not my guy, but I still want to see Parker Tech Tyson, great wrestler. Still want to see him capture a national title. I still want to see it. And, that's just one of the things that we talk about, that taking down Carter and Carter not getting that title. Now I think that would be the biggest upset of the tournament. That is my opinion. You can very well easily, say otherwise and say, hey, I don't specifically agree with that. But Parker Tech Tyson, I feel, would create a really huge upset and be really nice. So that's one way to go about it. Parker Tech Tyson is how I feel, kind of to get after it, and would be the guy to steal the show, because if Sirachi doesn't get a fifth title, that is going to be some interesting piece of news. Sirachi not to get a fifth title, that's going to be, I don't know how much more you can line that up for it to be interesting than that right there. Sirachi not to get a title. I don't think there's any other which way to even go about it than Sirachi not getting that fifth title. But I'm sure, the first round, I think all years of the NCAA is always handed of some upsets, like how years ago Robert Howard put up an upset against Malik Hounselman of Ohio State. So I definitely think that there are going to be some good upsets coming out of the first round, for sure out of the first round. I think that there will be some good first round upsets. And I think you're gonna see a lot of upsets this year. A lot of hungry guys in this NCAA tournament. A lot of interesting guys where you're not seeing, this 1-2 Penn State runaway. You're seeing a very interesting lineup and bracket. So I think it's going to be interesting. As you know, we talked about on the podcast before, the Oklahoma State Cowboys. They're going to have to do some of their best wrestling here today. They're going to have to do some of their best wrestling. And I think, I got Dean Hamady Jr. and I got Wyatt Henderson and I got Dustin Plott. So I'm going to really need those three guys to do some work, for my drafting of the bracket, which was, as most would call, an interesting choice for me to choose those guys. But I find it interesting. I think they're for sure All-Americans. So that's why I chose them, because I wanted to keep it interesting, but I also wanted for sure All-Americans. So I do believe that, but I do believe going in, talking about this tourney, there's a lot of things that, that we go across. And I think this is going to be an interesting tourney. Nice to see it in Philadelphia. You know, whatever happened to, they had MSG once. Let's get this NCAA tournament in some interesting places, I think we've seen St. Louis a number of times. We've seen Cleveland a number of times. At this point, let's stay away from there. Let's get it like in some very interesting play. I understand it's hard to kind of do that with March Madness going on. It's kind of hard to like tell an arena, hey, I want to do this, but let's get it in some pretty interesting places like MSG we've had before. Let's try to find some interesting places to hold it. But with that being said, that is as Sebastian would always say, like, comment, subscribe, and share. With that being said, this is this week's weigh-in, just a little, special edition NCAA tournament talk. But with that being said, this is the special edition NCAA tournament. With that being said, this is the weigh-in by Benoit Chestnut. And Sebastian, I gotta do my sign off right. With that being said, this is the weigh-in podcast by Benoit Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero. But don't worry, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled programming by next week. This is the weigh-in. Out.